It started late because of traffic to get into Parliament. Things are crazy right now outside of Parliament. I've got it pulled up. They're singing the national anthem. Here we go. This is going to be pretty intense. There's a lot of tension in and around Parliament. There's a lot of tension in and around Parliament because of the Million Man March for Children. So things are going to be really, really spicy. And I think we might see some of the federal politicians address SOGI, which is the curriculum in schools that millions of parents are protesting right this moment around Canada. I want to encourage you to give a like and subscribe if you aren't yet. Really helps grow the channel. You might see me as a familiar face from Mistersunshinebaby. This is another channel called House of Canada. It's my second channel. So go ahead and subscribe with those noties on. And here we go. Let's get into the cage, folks.
Expect our government to create real solutions that make a real difference in the lives of Canadians and not make slogans and empty promises. Canadians spoke and we listened, Mr. Speaker. We are taking immediate steps. One, lower and stabilize cost of groceries, which will help all Canadians by demanding that the 5 big grocers come up with a plan to stabilize food prices by Thanksgiving. 2, extend the CEBA loan repayments to help small businesses. And 3, incentivize construction of purpose-built rental units by removing the GST on construction of new apartment buildings. This is just the beginning, Mr. Speaker, and I'm ready to roll up my sleeves and work even harder for Canadians. And I'm determined to address the affordability challenges, as we all are on this side of the House, that Canadians are facing today. It's good to be back, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Red Deer Lacombe.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to mark the 9th National Hunting, Trapping and Fishing Heritage Day, which is celebrated on the 3rd Saturday in September every year. For generations, our people have harnessed the resources of Canada's outdoors, building resilient communities, embracing the principles of conservation, and fostering economic prosperity through sustainable practices. Hunters and anglers have devoted their lives to preserving our natural habitats, advocating for ethical practices, and ensuring the continuity of these cherished traditions for future generations. Unfortunately, after 8 years, these Liberals have undermined our cherished heritage through attempts to ban hunting rifles and blaming hunters for their rise in gun crime. Conservatives understand the important role hunters, trappers, and anglers play in both our economy and in conservation of our fish and wildlife. Conservatives, and only Conservatives, will always protect the ability of Canadians to hunt, fish, and trap for generations.
That's the Conservatives, though.
The honourable member for Windsor-Tecumseh.
Mr. Speaker, my community of Windsor-Tecumseh is rising. Hundreds of workers are building the Stellantis battery plant that will soon employ 3,000. Last week, I joined the Minister of Housing to officially open Meadowbrook Lane, the first affordable housing project in our community in 30 years. And that same day, the Minister and I stood on the deck of the Gordie Howe International Bridge as it nears completion. Over 9,000 workers have now worked on the largest infrastructure project in Canada. And this summer, the iconic Parks Canada beaver appeared in Ojibwe with a sign that says, soon to be the home of Ojibwe National Urban Park. Mr. Speaker, with strong Liberal investment, my community is thriving. And at the heart of that optimism are workers. And as our auto workers mobilize to fight for their fair share, we stand with them today, tomorrow, and always.
The Honourable Member for Beauport-Limoilou. Mr. Speaker, our Capitals are champions for the second time in 2 years in the Ligue Frontière. They won the championship against the Evansville Otters once again. Baseball fans responded with a new crowd record.
Just a reminder to drop a like on the stream, everyone.
916 fans attended games during the season. This 9th title in 24 years is the result of the talent and hard work of the players and the entire organization, who delivered moments of pure magic. I would particularly like to highlight the extraordinary work of manager Patrick Scalabrini and President Michel Laplante. I'd also like to take this opportunity to wish a happy retirement to David Glaude, who did great at the end with a home run. Congratulations to the whole team, the whole organization, organization. And once again, thank you for making us proud. The Honourable Member for Gatineau. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's the National Week of Trees and Forests, and the forestry sector has shaped the history of the Ottawa region. In 1926, CIP built the Gatineau newsprint mill on the Ottawa River and the Gatineau River. From then on, thousands of workers came to find work here. And it's on these pillars of heritage and identity that the city of Gatineau was born. The Gatineau plant has changed its names several times over the course of its history. It continues to be a major figure. It is now part of the Paper Excellence family, which is committed to supporting the company's long-term growth. This is great news for our 120 dedicated workers, members of Unifor. So I would like to salute the courage and great resilience of the employees over the years at the Gatineau plant, of whom I and we are very proud. Happy Forestry and Tree Week, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Montmagny, Lizla, Kamouraska, Rivière-du-Loup. Mr. Speaker, after 8 years of this government, everything is broken in this country. Inflation is already hurting families, and food prices are now expected to rise by 34% over the next 2 years. Successive interest rate hikes have doubled mortgage payments. 1 in 2 Canadians lives paycheck to paycheck. And what is this government doing? It persists with its plan to increase the carbon tax. Worse still, the Bloc is blindly supporting it. They want to radically increase the carbon tax. Do you know what radical means? Absolute, drastic. That's what the Bloc Liberal Coalition is all about, making everything more expensive, absolutely and drastically. You can't get more out of touch than that. To all families in Quebec and Canada, know this: it's expensive to vote Bloc. And remember, a Conservative government will bring back common sense by abolishing the Bloc Liberal tax to bring prices back down.
The Honourable Member for Vancouver Centre.
Mr. Speaker, this last weekend marked 20 years since the first North American safe injection site inside.
Question period has not begun just yet. This is statements by members.
With 1.7 million visits. I want to shout out to those who looked at the positive evidence of harm reduction seen in Europe and took a chance on a pilot project with the Portland Health Society that proved successful. The catalyst was then Mayor Philip Owen, who convinced 2 other levels of government to sign the Vancouver Agreement. The MP for Vancouver East was the provincial minister, I the federal, and all 3 of us together with UBC's Dr. Montana, Kerr and O'Shaughnessy, who headed the pilot project, took a political risk based on evidence. 18 months later, we saw 100% of lives saved and knew it was all worth it. It still is.
The Honourable Member for Milton.
We lost a dear friend last week at just 34 years old, my pal from Pemberton, Liam Fisher. Liam was a fellow paddler who recently moved to Grenada to pursue his dream of becoming a doctor at St. George's University. He was not content with just being the fittest guy in the lower mainland of Vancouver. He dreamed of doing more, helping more people, and he aspired to help people as being a doctor. Liam used to own a gym in North Vancouver. He once raised over $22,000 by flipping a 300-pound tire for over 10 kilometers to raise money for cancer research. He did that for his sister, Riva. Tragically, this week marks 6 years since Riva lost her battle with cancer. One of Riva's friends shared this quote after she passed 6 years ago. "Grief, I've learned, is really just love. It's all the love you want to give but cannot. All that unspent love gathers up in the corners of your eyes, the lump in your throat, and that hollow part in your chest. Grief is just love with no place to go." To Riva and Liam's parents, Hugh and Hillary, on behalf of the Canadian paddling community, we are so sorry. We love you so much.
The Honourable Member for Carlton Trail, Eagle Creek.
Mr. Speaker, let me tell you about the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. Many know him as the common sense leader our country needs. His school teacher parents know him as the boy they adopted and raised in their modest home in the suburbs of Calgary. His dad knows him as the son he took to early morning hockey games. His neighbors know him as the boy who used to deliver their morning newspaper. His children know him in Francais, Espanol, and English as Papa. And his colleagues know him as someone who is fighting hard every day for Canadians. So when Pierre says it doesn't matter who you know or where you're from, but rather who you are and where you're going, these aren't just empty words. He's lived it. Common sense. Let's bring it
For the
home.
common people.
The honourable member for...
I don't know what happened to the feed, folks. Something's going on in Parliament. Let me check it out.
Ocean. Pauline understands the threat of our changing climate and extreme weather events better than most. The town recently hosted their 3rd annual Climate Action Day, bringing together the local council and residents of Pauline with a shared determination to reduce carbon emissions through consistent and well thought out actions. Pauline
They're sabotaging the feed.
for all of us to
That's very weird. That doesn't happen at all.
Champions of change.
Ever.
And if our smallest communities can make significant strides in reducing the carbon footprint, then it's
All the bandwidth being used by the protesters.
to collectively challenge communities.
Guys, I got gigabyte internet. I'm hardwired in.
Climate change.
It's not my internet at all.
All of us to act. And Pauline's exemplary leadership serves as an inspiration to us all.
Hear, hear.
The honourable member...
Drop a like on the stream, everybody. Let's try and get to 200
In June,
likes.
the finance minister said Canada's plan to bring down inflation is working. She called it a milestone moment, taking credit for the reduction. Yesterday, we learned inflation has gone up to 4%, an increase of 43% since she made those comments. Now inflation is higher here than in the United States. Mortgage payments are up 151% to $3,560. Rent has doubled. Before this Prime Minister took office, it took 25 years to pay off your mortgage. Now it takes 25 years just to save for a down payment. This NDP Liberal government wants to blow the Prime Minister's
My upload is gigabyte.
than all previous Prime Ministers combined. Common sense Conservatives will bring homes people can afford by reducing inflationary deficits and taxes to bring lower interest rates. After 8 years, this Prime Minister just is not worth the cost.
Not worth the cost.
Member for Kamloops, Thompson, Caribou.
Mr. Speaker, first, I have a very special message for someone important in my life. To my daughter, happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
And my life got 1,000 times better the day you were born. But I worry about my daughter's safety, given that after 8 years of this Liberal NDP government, crime is up nearly 40%. Gang-related murders are up 108%. Worst of all, Mr. Speaker, sex crimes against children are up 126%. Despite this Liberal NDP government stands by their pillowy soft sentences for gun, sex, and violent offenders that are an affront to ordinary Canadians. Luckily, we are beginning to realize that the Prime Minister is not worth the cost. Conservatives and our leader are ready to work to reverse the wave of violent crime that has been ushered in by this Prime Minister. He's not ready to act. We are.
The honourable member for Ottawa-Vanier. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today, I would like to pay tribute to and thank an exceptional woman, the Honourable Monique Bégin. She paved the way for all of the women who followed her into this House with profoundly liberal values, feminism, equality, social justice, and equity, which guided her throughout her career. In 1972, she became one of Quebec's first 3 female members of Parliament. This pioneer also served with distinction as a cabinet minister, creating the child tax credit, supporting an increase in the guaranteed income supplement, and passing the Canada Health Act. After politics, she made her home in Ottawa-Vanier and continued her service in the academic world at the University of Ottawa. She also continued to influence and advise political decision-makers, and I had the privilege of benefiting from that. Monique Bégin, we owe you a great deal of thanks for your achievements, and we have a duty to carry the torch that you gave us. To her family and friends, I offer my sincere condolences. Rest in peace. Thank you.
The The honourable member for Winnipeg Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to recognize the work of Project Empower Her and other women's health organizations who have come to Ottawa to advocate for universal coverage of contraception in Canada. It is time that we end financial barriers that limit access to contraceptives. I heed Action Canada's call for, in quotes, for universal no-cost prescription contraception that is predicated on everyone being able to give free and informed consent, and on that consent being respected. And to, in quotes, see an end to forced sterilization and discrimination in the healthcare system. End of quotes. It is time to put in place a national pharmacare strategy that includes free contraceptives. It is time to get rid of the cost barriers that limit an individual's right to choose. It is time to respect people's bodily autonomy, including the right to reproductive choice. And it's time to recognize reproductive rights as human rights and ensure free access to contraceptives in Canada. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Belleuil-Chambly. Mr. Speaker, it's only natural that Quebec should see itself as
I don't think Quebec's going to be messing around today.
It was conceived by giants. Giants like Jacques-Yvan Morin, who passed away on July 26th. Leader of the official opposition in 1973, of just 6 elected members of the Parti Québécois who 3 years later would transform Quebec. Then he was Deputy Premier of Quebec under René Lévesque, Minister of Education, of Cultural and Scientific Development, then Intergovernmental Affairs. Jacques-Yvan Morin was at the forefront of writing our national history. A renowned jurist, trained at great schools like Harvard and Cambridge. A distinguished academic, the first career professor of international law at the Université de Montréal. He belonged to that rare breed of illustrious Quebec intellectuals who, at that time, totally devoted themselves to the service of Quebec. On behalf of the Bloc Québécois, I offer my condolences to his wife Elisabeth Galland-Morin, his son Étienne, and all those who loved him. Thank you, Jacques-Yvan Morin, giant of Quebec's history and pioneer of its future, where younger generations can now reap the rewards.
The honourable member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, and Rideau Lakes.
Instead of celebrating this harvest season, farmers across Canada are shuddering at the thought of their first carbon tax bill. When the NDP Liberal government triples the carbon tax, farmers will be forced to pay $150,000 in additional taxes, all for the crime of working hard to feed this country. And the NDP Liberal government's punitive tax is felt all the way from the farmer who grows the food, the trucker who moves the food, to the Canadian who eats the food if they can afford the food. Onions up 60%, cabbage up 70%, carrots up 74%, even potatoes are up 68%. After 8 years of this Prime Minister's, families will pay more than $16,000 more for groceries this year alone. With food banks from Victoria by the Sea, Prince Edward Island, to Victoria, British Columbia, lined out the door, Thanksgiving is going to be tough. The NDP Liberal carbon tax is truly farm to table, and this Prime Minister is not worth the cost.
The honourable member for Aurora, Oak Ridges, Richmond Hill.
Where the hell is Daddy Pierre today?
MP for Aurora, Oak Ridges, Richmond Hill, to speak on gender equality, a fundamental issue for so many in my riding and all of Canada. Today marks the midpoint of Gender Equality Week, and in this place, we are just about midpoint to gender equality. Over 100 years have passed since women could run for office, yet we are still only 30% of women MPs, but more than 50% of the population. As Liberals, women make up over 36% of our caucus. Our policies encourage women to run. We address the barriers they face. We unequivocally support women's rights. But the official opposition has less than 18% women in their caucus, a caucus which is certainly not unanimous in its support of gender equality or a woman's right to choose. In honor of Monique Bégin and other trailblazers like her, we must keep moving forward towards a just and equal society and not let regressive forces take us back. Hear, hear.
Liberals are so damn woke. Oral questions. Honourable Leader of the Opposition. Here we go.
The Opposition.
Let's go, Pierre. Put them in their damn place.
After 8 years, this Prime Minister has said that these are difficult times for politicians. He said at his conference on inflation in Charlottetown at the cabinet retreat that inflation has gone back down. But yesterday we found out that inflation is going back up. And in fact, the finance minister declared victory in the fight against inflation. But since that declaration of victory, inflation has risen by 43%, which forced the Bank of Canada to raise interest rates for Canadians who are the most in debt of any G7 citizens. Will the government finally bring down taxes and inflationary deficits so that we can bring down interest rates before we have a housing crisis and mortgage crisis? The Honourable Innovation Minister.
Oh, big standing applause, eh? Hello? Why do they cut the feed? Sorry.
Now, I'm sure that the opposition leader would like to hear the answer. So we will ask everyone to please calm down. It's all well and good to be excited, and I'm happy that everyone's excited.
It's not me, guys. It's the people running the mic in the house. They're like cutting the feed. They don't want us to hear something, I guess. They don't want us to hear this applause.
Allez-y.
I thank colleagues on both sides of this House for their enthusiasm. Now, Mr. Speaker, this summer we listened to Canadians. We met with them and we heard them. They told us 3 things, Mr. Speaker. First, they asked us to help them with the cost of groceries. Second, they said help us with housing. And the third thing that Canadians want, they did not tell us stop helping families, stop helping the vulnerable. They did not say that. That's not what they want. Mr. Speaker, Canadians who are tuning in, they know that this party will always be there for them, but they're starting to understand that the Conservative leader is not there for them and he's too risky for Canada. The Honourable Opposition Leader.
Oh, here we go. Here we go.
Wow. For the first time, seem to be happy with the person leading them during question period.
Oh! Fun Pierre is back.
I congratulate the member for his new role. Another guy from Shawinigan might become Prime Minister. I understand. Even the Liberals want to sack the Prime Minister because the Prime Minister costs too much and he's not worth the cost.
OMG. Everyone in the chat dropped some W's. That was awesome by Pierre.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservative leader likes his big speeches, but Canadians told us very clearly that they need our government to help them. That's why we're here for them. We're helping with grocery costs, Mr. Speaker. We also called in major grocery heads this week. We are going to bring down GST for housing. We are going to take action to help Canadians, Mr. Speaker. Canadians are tired of hearing the Conservative leader's slogans. He takes too many risks. He's too risky and dangerous for Canada, but we are there for Canadians, and we always will be, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Opposition Leader.
Speaker, at his recent retreat in Charlottetown, the Prime Minister said that life is really tough for politicians. It's off for another trip to New York for 3 days to give a couple of speeches and burn a whole lot of fuel. At the same time as he raises carbon taxes on
talking about climate,
the crime of driving to work and feeding their families. Yesterday, inflation was up and way up. It is accelerating. It is higher than in the States and in Japan, which could drive up interest rates. Will he balance the budget and axe the tax to bring inflation and interest rates down?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
He's not messing around today, folks. They don't want him to get up and talk. They don't want Harry Potter. I love how the Liberals are trying to copy the Conservatives with their enthusiasm. I like it. I like it. I do.
Order. 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 There we go. Shh. Okay, I realize it's Wednesday and everybody's excited and the emotions are running high, but we have to get through questions here. Let's calm down and hear the questions and the answers. The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've been very clear that affordability is, of course, a top priority for this government. It is very clear that it is a huge concern on the minds of many, many, many Canadians. It is certainly, it has caused us to look at programs such as removing the GST from the construction of new rental units, provide money for home efficiency, the grocery rebate, and a range of other things. But I would say, Mr. Speaker, that it's also important that while we are addressing affordability, we do so in a manner that actually will allow us to also address the climate crisis. It is an existential threat to the future of our children. Shame on them for having no climate plan. On this side of the House, we can them at the same time. We can do both.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Well, they're prepared to thunderously applaud anyone other than their own leader who stands. It's no wonder the Prime Minister says it's a really hard time to be a politician. And, right now, speaking of hard times,
oh my God.
He's off in New York for another 3 days, burning a lot of jet fuel while he applies a carbon tax that he wants to quadruple to 61 cents a litre on farmers, single parents, on struggling working class families who have to choose between eating and heating. Will the Prime Minister park the plane, end the high carbon hypocrisy, and axe the tax?
Yeah. Pierre is not messing around.
Unlike the Conservatives, our government actually has a plan to support Canadians during this time. We have, for example, the grocery rebate helping 11 million Canadians, Mr. Speaker, 4.2 million Canadians with the workers' benefit, over 6 million Canadians with indexing old age security. Mr. Speaker, what is their plan? That's right. They don't have one.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Our plan is to axe the tax and use technology, not taxes.
Whoa! There it is! First time ever, Pierre Poilievre says his plan for climate change.
High-flying, high-carbon hypocrite is jetting around the world.
Whoa!
Expense of Canadian taxpayers at the same time as he raises fuel taxes on everyday Canadians. The NDP supports him 100% in this 61 cent a litre carbon tax that they want to impose. That and the inflationary deficits have driven inflation back up. Will this government finally end the inflationary taxes and deficits so that we can bring down rates before Canadians go bankrupt?
The Honourable Minister for Housing.
Mr. Speaker, over nearly 2 decades in Canadian politics, he hasn't seen a program that helps Canadians he doesn't want to cut. Over the course of my time in this chamber, I've watched him attack the programs that support my constituents, programs like employment insurance, programs like the Canada Pension Plan. Mr. Speaker, we're going to continue to put forward measures that are going to support Canadians during their time of need. He may dismiss them as big, fat government programs. I call them programs that put food on the table for families who live in my community.
The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly.
Wow.
Mr. Speaker.
Great job, Pierre.
Too many Quebecers and too many Canadians.
Don't forget to drop a like on the stream, everybody. Let's try to get up to 500 likes.
Housing and maybe even homelessness. Now, the GST break for rental housing is positive, but it might not benefit renters, the ones who most need help. So will the government set aside its desire to meddle in Quebec's jurisdiction and the province's jurisdiction? Will Ottawa recognize that the best solution is to unblock and make available the $900 million in housing spending that it has for Quebec? The Honourable Housing Minister. Mr. Speaker, I've had many conversations with Quebec, and I have spoken with my counterpart, and my team has met with my counterpart's team. Just this morning, I had a call, and tonight I will have another call. We, of course, share my colleagues' priority to bring down housing prices in Quebec and to build more housing in Quebec and everywhere in Canada. That's essential, and I will continue my efforts. I will continue to work with my Quebec counterpart, and I will continue to work with Quebec. The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. Canada needs to stop with the meddling and interference. Canada needs to help the least well-off when it comes to rising prices and housing prices. Ottawa needs to build housing so that Ottawa is not contributing to inflation. Ottawa is spending billions, giving billions to the oil and gas industry. Shouldn't Ottawa rather stop subsidizing oil and gas and then use that money to increase old age security, to also stop discriminating against seniors aged 65 to 74, and also invest in social housing?
Wow.
The Honourable Natural Resources Minister.
Bloc is going after them, eh?
Of course, we must fight climate change. We need to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions in all sectors of our economy, and especially in the oil and gas sector. We eliminated subsidies to fossil fuels. We did so 2 or 3 months ago. We will, of course, build a strong economy in a low-carbon future.
The Prime Minister admitted that he could have and should have done more to build affordable homes in Canada. Now the reality is we have a situation where we're losing more affordable homes than we are building as a nation. Now, what does the Prime Minister have to say to a renter who is living in a home that he can afford right now, but lives in fear that one day that home will be rent-evicted or dem-evicted and he'll lose it? What does a Prime Minister have to say to ensure that people will be able to stay in the homes that they can afford?
The Honourable Minister for Housing.
I like how Singh is going after Trudeau.
Concerned about making sure some of the most vulnerable Canadians have a safe and affordable
But he needs to end the coalition.
That was, in fact, the motivation for the National Housing Strategy, where our government re-entered the social housing space after decades of governments, I should say, of different partisan stripes, vacated it. In reality, Mr. Speaker, we know that we need to do more. That is why we move forward with eliminating GST on apartments that are going to be rented to Canadians. Part of the solution to the housing crisis is to build more homes, and that is exactly what we're going to do.
The Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
On ne veut pas entendre.
This is not what we want to hear. We don't want promises. We want things to get done. Currently, it's impossible to find.
And the coalition, buddy.
There just isn't any. If a Canadian wants to find a unit to rent, well, there are no units with affordable rent. So what is this Prime Minister going to do? How will the Prime Minister guarantee that affordable units will be built?
L'Honorable Ministre.
The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, it's true that it's difficult when Canadians can't find affordable housing. That's why our government implemented the National Housing Strategy. After decades without necessary investments being made, through our strategy, we're building more affordable units.
Last week, we eliminated GST on the construction of apartments in this country. This is going to add to the supply. This is
not enough, buddy.
Cost for people to rent and provide protection for people who are struggling to find a place to call home. It's the right path forward. We're going to continue.
L'Honorable député de Charlebourg.
The Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Haut-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, the carbon tax was imposed by the Liberals, but the Bloc Québécois is proposing to increase it even more drastically. The Bloc Québécois claims to want to defend the interests of Quebecers, but let's be clear. The Bloc wants to take money from Quebecers and hand it to the feds. It costs a lot of money to vote for the Bloc. So, will the Prime Minister reject the Bloc's request to radically increase the carbon tax on the backs of Quebecers? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, the costs that Quebecers are familiar with are the costs of climate change. There were floods and forest fires all summer, and now we're on to hurricane season. Quebecers know that pollution cannot be free in Canada anymore. Quebecers want the government to keep taking action to protect future generations, and we will continue.
I don't think anyone
action. It's a shame that the Conservatives
wants to be taxed like this.
Plan to address climate change, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Haut-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker. Now, former Liberal Finance Minister John Manley said that the Prime Minister's deficits are pushing on the inflation accelerator pedal, forcing the Bank of Canada to put more pressure on the brakes by raising interest rates. Here's an example of crazy spending. The government spent $284 million to redesign Canadian passports. That's $333 million, Mr. Speaker.
Oh, my God. And he put himself in the passport, too.
That's appalling, it's wasteful, and it makes no sense. Will the Prime Minister stop burning up Canadians' money? The Honourable Minister.
First chance to rise in the House as the Minister of Citizen Services. I'd like to thank my wife, my constituents, and of course the caucus. I look forward to working with everybody.
Shut up, Terry, and get on with it.
I'm very happy to report that thanks to the hard work of the now House Leader, the passport backlog is completely eliminated. In addition, our investments mean that the printers are now 5 times faster. You can check your passport application online, and soon you'll be able to renew your passport online as well. That's delivering better services for Canadians.
The honourable member for Thornhill.
8 years of this Prime Minister has punished Canadians with an NDP Liberal government who spent billions of dollars to double the price of a home, to double the rent, to double the mortgage payment, all because of their inflation.
Let's go, Melissa.
And they are building less homes this month than they did last month. Inflation is up, home building is down. So when will the housing minister stand up and admit that this Prime Minister is just not worth the cost?
The honourable minister for housing.
Mr. Speaker, with enormous respect for my honourable colleague, when their party leader was the housing minister, he advanced a program with $300 million that he said would build 25,000 homes. Fewer than 100 were built, Mr. Speaker. We have advanced programs that are going to build homes and that have been building homes. The reality is we know we need to do more. That's why we're eliminating the GST on apartments to be constructed. That's why we are advancing a plan to change the way that cities build home. It is working. We can't do it alone, but we will bring communities, we will bring provinces with us. It's the right path forward. I hope the Conservatives join us.
The honourable member for Thornhill.
The cost of a home has doubled in this country. The minister who made international students sleep on the
Hey, her hair looks pretty good today.
of 1 million people is now in charge of building homes in this country. How do you lose 1 million people? He's recycling broken campaign promises from 8 years ago that won't fix the fact that buying a castle in Europe is now cheaper than buying a family home in Kitchener. Are Canadians supposed to trust the guy who broke immigration to fix housing? Over there to fix inflation?
Wow. Good job, good job.
Mr. Speaker, with respect, I think it's very dangerous when any member of this House starts playing politics with immigration. With respect, if the Conservatives think...
Because he was the immigration minister, wasn't he?
Tied to the fact that we have welcomed...
He's like, oh shit, you're mentioning my previous job.
The honourable minister.
What a loser.
20 seconds. Please continue.
Mr. Speaker, welcoming an ambitious level of newcomers is not breaking the immigration system, and we want to make sure communities are equipped to welcome them. We are not going to take lessons from the Conservatives who failed miserably when it came to housing by doing absolutely nothing. We have removed taxes on home construction. We are changing the way that cities build homes. We're going to build Canada, and we're going to advance the measures to make it happen.
The honourable member for Haldimand and Norfolk.
Mr. Speaker, they lost track of 1 million people. After 8 years of this Prime Minister, housing prices are at a
bold choice to wear green.
and many Canadians have lost hope of ever owning their own home. This is a direct result of the NDP Liberal government's reckless deficit spending that has poured countless cash into the economy, driving up inflation, which has driven up interest rates, which has doubled mortgage rates. Will this Prime Minister finally stop his inflationary spending so that Canadians can once again keep a roof over their head?
Good job.
The honourable parliament.
Good job.
Mr. Speaker, I hope that this feigned compassion on behalf of the Conservatives isn't fooling Canadians, because on 2 occasions, Mr. Speaker, on 2 previous occasions, the Conservative
Who wore it better?
lowering taxes for the middle
Who wore the green better? Let me know down in the chat.
been crisscrossing
Conservatives or liberal?
over the course of the
We got green versus green.
Not a single Canadian has told us that they would like us to cut our programs. Canadians are relying on the supports that our government is providing, and we are providing them in a fiscally responsible way.
The honourable member for Haldimand Norfolk.
Mr. Speaker, former Liberal Finance Minister John Manley said that the Liberal deficit spending is like pressing a gas pedal on inflation, while the Bank of Canada is trying to press the brakes on it by raising interest rates. 8 years ago, Canadians could afford to pay off their mortgage in 25 years. Now it takes 25 years just to save for a down payment. When will this Prime Minister stop his reckless spending so that Canadians can once again afford to buy homes?
Wouldn't that be something, eh? Housing was actually affordable?
Very truly, Deputy Prime Minister.
Once again, just a few weeks ago, rating agencies confirmed Canada's AAA credit rating. That is because what we are doing is...
Hey, you're not allowed to say that. That's a Freeland talking point.
So in a responsible way. Mr. Speaker, we have just announced the next step in our plan to build more homes faster. What we will do is create more apartment buildings for more Canadian families right across the country. The response from the Conservative leader was, we don't need any more of those. Mr. Speaker, Canadians do need their federal government, and this is the federal government that has their back.
The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly.
Reminder, everybody, drop a like on the stream. Let's try and get over 500.
Global Oil Convention in Calgary. Ottawa sent 3 ministers. 3 ministers. That's not 0. 3. That sends a message. And then the Prime Minister has the gall to go to UN meetings on climate change. Meanwhile, oil and gas, big oil, they're getting filthy rich. And oil and gas are getting richer on gas prices going up at the pump. So, will the government commit to ending subsidies to big oil? The Honourable Natural Resources Minister. As I said, we have implemented a framework to reduce and eliminate subsidies to oil and gas, to fossil fuels. I went to Calgary. I gave a speech on climate change and the importance of reducing greenhouse gas emissions in all sectors of our economy, which includes the oil and gas sector, of course. The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. The government subsidizes rich oil and gas companies that don't at all need the money. Meanwhile, the government is holding back money for social housing. The government is refusing to increase old age security, which is decreasing. Pensions are decreasing. Shouldn't the government take the money that it gives oil companies and instead invest that money in social housing and old age security? The Honourable Minister. The Honourable Member is saying things which are not true. We have implemented a framework to reduce...
I'm surprised he didn't call it misinformation.
...fossil fuel subsidies. That's very important. We need to speed up the development of a prosperous economy for a low-carbon future. The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Mr. Speaker, if we tax vegetable growers, if we tax the farmers who transport the vegetables and the processors too, all those taxes, well, prices will inevitably rise everywhere in the country for groceries. Meanwhile, half of Canadians are struggling to get by from one paycheck to the next, and the Bloc Québécois Liberal Coalition feels that you're not paying enough.
It feels like they're doing it on purpose.
Carbon taxes, but its MPs want to drastically increase carbon taxes. Why are the Liberals and the Bloc Québécois joining forces to make Quebecers poorer? The Honourable Innovation Minister. Mr. Speaker, it's very unfortunate that Canadians and Quebecers have to hear a question like that because, in fact, just this week, Canadians saw that on this side of the House, we are taking action. What have we done to help Canadians? Well, we called in the CEOs of big companies to express to them the frustration that millions of Canadians are feeling. We told big grocers that enough is enough and that we need to take action to stabilize grocery prices in Canada. The Conservatives love their slogans, but instead of shouting their slogans, they should unite with us in coalition to help Canadians. That's what Canadians expect. The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable.
Oh, he really wants a coalition.
Making all kinds of excuses for their radical tax hikes. They say that the carbon tax does not affect Quebec. That's false. This second carbon tax, supported by the Bloc, will add 20 cents to the cost of a litre of gas. After 8 years, the Liberals have managed to convince the leader of the Bloc Québécois to take more money out of Quebecers' pockets and send it where?
Greasy.
That is obviously irresponsible if they want to help families who are struggling. Voting for the Bloc is costing people a lot, Mr. Speaker. Why is the Prime Minister backing the Bloc's plan to radically increase taxes at the expense of Quebecers? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What is drastic and irresponsible is denying the existence of climate change. That is what the Conservatives have been doing for years. They are
the vampire's back.
80% of Canadians who are getting more in their pockets. They're telling people that they don't deserve a more affordable life. And you know what's irresponsible and unacceptable is that the Conservative Party, just 2 years ago, they themselves suggested carbon pricing or pollution pricing, and now they're singing another tune.
What Canadians want right now is for inflation to come down and for interest rates to fall, not to pour fuel on the fire of inflation. That was what this finance minister promised last year. Instead, mortgage interest rates are up 31%. Inflation is up 4% this month alone. After 8 years, this Liberal NDP government refuses to be the financial stewards that this country so desperately needs. The Prime Minister is not worth the cost. Mr. Speaker, will the Prime Minister finally stop his inflationary spending so Canadians can keep a roof over their head?
The Honourable Minister of Health. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let's be specific about what they're talking about when they're talking about cuts. Because when they're talking about dealing with global inflation, they want to do it on the backs of the most vulnerable, as if cutting from the most vulnerable people in Canada is going to somehow fix global inflation. That means, as an example, with the dental care program that we're rolling out, 3.5 million seniors will lose their dental care. That means 181,000 people with disabilities will lose their dental care. That means 1 million children will lose their dental care. That's what they're talking about, Mr. Speaker. Let's be clear about what their real plan is.
The Honourable Member for Hastings, Lennox and Addington.
False and empty, condescending rhetoric. Let's quote former Liberal. This is a bit like driving your car with one foot on the gas and the other on the brake, especially if there's slushy conditions under your tires. It's not a good plan for controlling the direction of your vehicle, nor is it a good plan for controlling the direction of the economy either. After 8 years, this Liberal NDP government is still not able to address the housing and living crisis that they helped create. Mr. Speaker, again, will the Prime Minister finally stop his inflationary spending so people don't go bankrupt? Yes or no?
Yeah. Great question.
House Leader.
You know, Mr. Speaker, what the Conservatives, when they were in government, higher unemployment,
she's the worst,
lower wages, and stagnation when it came to poverty rights. Mr. Speaker, when they're talking about cutting, they're talking about cutting things like childcare. They're talking about cutting things like dental care. They're talking about rolling back pensions, just like they did when they were in government, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, what Canadians need right now is a government that's there for them, and what they can't afford is the risky ideas of the Conservative Party of Canada. Thank you.
I love how she's getting heckled and just ignoring it.
Now, before going to the next question, I just want to compliment the honourable members for South Shore St. Margaret's and Dufferin Caledon, who are very quiet during the questions. Now, if you could just carry that through the answers, I would really appreciate it. The honourable member for Vancouver.
Fucking Mr. Speaker, man.
Liberals caused the housing crisis by cancelling the national co-op and housing program for 30 years ago. Canada is now amongst the lowest of the G7 countries in social housing stock. Seniors, families, everyday Canadians need a home that they can afford. Under the Liberals' national housing strategy, it will take at least 125 years to build the community housing that we need. Talk is cheap. Bold action is needed. Will the Liberals put people before profits and commit to building 2 million units of co-op and social housing?
The Honourable Minister for Housing.
Mr. Speaker, I thank my honourable colleague for the question, and I share her perspective that
Where's Marco, everybody? Where's Marco Mendicino?
Including subsidized housing for low-income families.
I haven't seen him in a while.
I agree with the NDP that the reason that we find ourselves with such an extraordinary housing shortage is that federal governments of different partisan stripes for decades had vacated the space. We re-entered the sector in 2017 with the advancing of the National Housing Strategy. We are seeing hundreds of thousands of subsidized homes provide safety and security for low-income families. We will continue to advance more measures to build housing stock, including tax incentives to get builders building and changing the way that cities build homes, but we will not forget the most vulnerable along the way.
The honourable member for Esquimalt Saanich-Sooke.
Mr. Speaker, as Canadians, we should be making sure that all our kids feel safe, loved, and supported. But right now, anti-trans demonstrations across Canada are making this impossible.
No, they're not anti-trans demonstrations.
It's blocked an NDP motion calling on all Canadian leaders to condemn this rising tide of hate and violence. Will the Liberals join New Democrats in condemning this anti-2S LGBTQI plus hate by supporting our motion when it comes back to the House? Will they join us in demonstrating that Canada is truly a country where there's no space for hate?
No, that is misinformation.
For diversity.
That's a load of shit, everybody. That angers me. It's about keeping the kids alone.
Mr. Speaker, and a special thank you to the member across for his work, his advocacy, and his lived experience. Absolutely, we stand with trans and queer youth, and as I reflect on what has happened outside these walls today, the marches that we see, I remind everybody that as a parent, I understand the need for parents to be at the center of their kids' lives. But I also very much understand the need to center trans and queer kids and make sure that they are heard, make sure that they have safe spaces. To those kids, we're with you. We hear you. I have spoken to them across.
The honourable member for Etobicoke.
Kids don't know if they're queer or trans. They're kids.
Mr. Speaker, as we speak, the Ukrainian people are risking everything and sacrificing their lives to defend their homeland against Russia's genocidal invasion. Russia's invasion is not just an existential threat to Ukraine. It is also the primary reason for food and energy price inflation here in Canada and around the world, and it is a major threat to global security and to Canada's security. So Canada must stand with the Ukrainian people until they win. Could the Minister of National Defence share with Canadians what Canada is doing to support the brave people of Ukraine?
The Honourable Minister of National Defence.
I'd like to begin by thanking the member from Etobicoke Centre not only for his question, but for his exceptional leadership in support of the Ukraine. Mr. Speaker, in the face of Russia's unrelenting brutality and aggression, Ukrainians have fought back with remarkable strength and courage, and Canada continues to stand with them. Canada has already provided over $1.8 billion in military aid, and earlier this week, Mr. Speaker, while visiting our soldiers in the United Kingdom who are training Ukrainian soldiers, I announced that Canada will contribute $33 million to a British-led air defense partnership. And this investment, Mr. Speaker, will equip Ukraine with the tools that they need to defend their skies and to protect critical infrastructure. Canada and our partners and allies will always support Ukrainian friends in the comprehensive military aid they need to fight.
The honourable member for Dufferin-Caledon.
Yesterday, I was at the International Ploughing Match, which was in my riding, and I spoke with farmers all across Canada. What's their number one concern? The carbon tax. Whether it's drying grain or driving their combine, the carbon tax is crushing Canadian farmers. And when farmers pay more, Canadians pay more at the grocery store. And after 8 years of paying more, Canadians can't afford this Liberal government. Will they come to their senses and axe the tax?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Mr. Speaker, being a farmer, I understand the trouble and the difficulties farmers have. Imagine going to your potato field and having to take a bulldozer with you to pull the potato harvester. Out in the prairies, not enough rain to grow a crop. Fiona blew our barns down and killed our dairy cattle. They blew the wharves to pieces. That is why we as a government have invested in the climate change and will continue to invest to make sure that farmers
take a seat, Colonel,
can grow crops and be able to have fishing and harvests and everything.
Someone help him get off the floor of the House.
I'm glad the member says that this government is investing in climate change. What they have is investments in a tax plan, because if it was a climate plan that was going to fix climate change, Carbon Tax 1 and Carbon Tax 2 would have actually done something, Mr. Speaker. But all these things he talked about are still happening. Why? Because it's a tax. It's not an environment plan. And what this tax does is make everything more expensive for Canadians.
Exactly.
They say they're going to help. Will they actually help and axe the tax?
Yes.
Parliamentary Secretary.
I represent a rural riding too, and what that member doesn't get is that farmers believe in climate change and they want to help fight it.
No, they don't. They do not want to be taxed $1 billion.
Clear. Affordability is a major issue, and we're reminded harshly through the wild.
He should open his phone and go back to telling people in the DMs to F off, like he did a couple years ago.
The honourable member for Dufferin-Caledon would like to hear the response to his answer. I'll let the parliamentary secretary continue, please. Please, everyone, listen so that we can all have an idea of what the answer is. Please continue.
Thanks very much, Mr. Speaker. And like I was saying, like the member, I live in a rural riding too. And unlike the Conservatives, I spent the summer talking to my constituents and hearing their concerns, and I heard them loud and clear. Affordability is a top issue, but we're also reminded harshly through extreme weather events throughout the summer that fighting climate change is more important than ever. We have a plan to address both, Mr. Speaker. That's important, environment and climate change, as well as affordability. But the Conservatives don't have either. Our climate action incentive sends more money back to...
The honourable member for Foothills.
Just cut him off.
The Liberal Agriculture Minister claims that
Let's go, John.
support the carbon tax. How out of touch can a minister be? Only 2% of Canadian farmers think the Liberals even support agriculture because they know this Prime Minister is unaffordable. Farmers can't afford to pay close to $1 billion in carbon tax.
There it is.
They can't afford it when diesel goes up 70 cents a litre. They can't afford to pay more in fertilizer and feed and higher interest rates. Does the Liberal Agriculture Minister truly support quadrupling the carbon tax on farmers, truckers, and processors, knowing the consequences means higher food prices for Canadians?
Minister for Agriculture. And I appreciate my honourable question, but the fact of the matter is farmers are fully aware of what's taking place in this country. Hurricane Fiona blew down our barns, killed our cattle. Temperatures went to 50 below zero, extreme winds over 200 kilometers an hour, blowing everything to pieces, Mr. Speaker. Farmers fully understand that that adds cost to everything, and in fact, that is why this government has and will continue to invest.
Nobody wants to pay your carbon tax.
We stand with farmers. We have and will continue to stand with our farmers.
The honourable member for Beauce. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister and his partner, the Bloc, are driving up food prices by continuing to support the carbon tax. Because yes, the second carbon tax does apply in Quebec, unlike what the Bloc tries to claim. Input costs are going up for our farmers, and transport costs are skyrocketing. And can you believe that the Bloc wants to drastically increase the carbon tax? Yeah, voting for the Bloc is very expensive. Can the Prime Minister tell us if he's going to listen to the Bloc's demand to drastically increase the tax? The Honourable Minister of Transport. Mr. Speaker, my colleague wants to talk about costs. How much does it cost a forest that burns? How much does it cost our lakes, our rivers, when they flood? How much does it cost a tornado, a hurricane that hits our rural areas? How much does that cost in health care for our kids? Mr. Speaker, there's one thing that's very clear. Canada doesn't have, can't afford the Conservatives. The
what?
Member for Beauport-Limoilou. Mr. Speaker, when the federal government finally named Davy the third partner in the national shipbuilding strategy, we thought that things would finally turn around in Quebec City. But has anything changed? No, nothing. The federal government gave about $500 million to Irving to modernize their shipyard. How much for Davy? Zero. How many of the 7 contracts for icebreakers that the Prime Minister came and promised in April with a beautiful photo op? How many did we get? Zero. Zero. No subsidies, no contracts. So what is it really worth to date, the federal government's commitment to Davy? The Honourable
Minister of Public Services. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm very happy to answer this question. And I would note that my colleague was present as well at that announcement last spring, and she saw then, as she can see today, the extent to which the workers, the 1,300 suppliers, and all the partners in the Quebec City area were very happy with that decision, with the choice that we've made in favor of the Quebec City region. And I think that she should recognize, beyond partisanship, that we're there for workers, we're there for... But we're getting down to work. Davy and the government of Quebec invested together $840 million to compensate this federal injustice. Despite Ottawa's inaction, Davy is ready, Mr. Speaker. This government promised $8.5 billion in contracts last April. 1,800 jobs depend on it. When are these contracts going to show up? We want a date. The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would be very happy to brief my colleague on this. I think that she forgot what we presented last spring, and I think she's forgotten that the contracts are already in place. There are about 1,000 workers in the shipyards right now. There are going to be contracts for the next 20 to 25 years with thousands more workers that are going to be hired. And of course, there are tens of thousands who are going to be working for the 1,300 suppliers. This is great news for the Quebec City region. I would ask my colleague to celebrate along with us.
Colchester. Mr. Speaker, every member of this House receives emails, letters, and phone calls explaining how unaffordable life has become due to the NDP Liberal government's punishing carbon tax. Right. After 8 years of this Liberal Prime Minister, everything costs more, and of course inflation on basic necessities such as food continues to rise. The price of lettuce is up, the price of carrots is up, the price of potatoes is up, all more than 70%. And quite frankly, Mr. Speaker, Canadians are fed up. Yeah. Will this Liberal Prime Minister cancel his plans to increase his inflationary carbon tax? Good question. The Honourable Minister for Housing.
Mr. Speaker, it's hard to take seriously a question from the honourable member when just a couple of evenings ago I read a news article indicating he and some of his Conservative colleagues went on a $45,000 trip to have $600 bottles of champagne in the United Kingdom so they could meet with...
He really wants to talk about cost of things?
...price on pollution.
That's rich.
...is that we're going to continue to put forward measures that grow the economy, and I'll take this moment to point out that the Conservatives, contrary to the will of the provincial Conservative government in Nova Scotia, are opposing a regulatory framework that's going to allow us to build offshore renewable energy, get with the times. We're going to build a green economy for the future.
Hear, hear. The Honourable Member for Cumberland, Colchester. Mr. Speaker, what this Liberal government would like to do is deflect from those things that are very important to Canadians, like their inflationary carbon tax. Even the Governor of the Bank of Canada states clearly, and I quote, the carbon tax announcement that have it going up, that increases inflation each year. The ongoing punishment of Canadians simply for trying to buy food, put a roof over their heads, for which this minister is failing again like he did on immigration, and heat their homes must stop. After 8 years, this Liberal Prime Minister is not worth the cost. When will he cancel his plans to increase his inflationary carbon tax? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
And responsible government needs to have a plan to address both affordability and climate change, but all these Conservatives have are slogans and catchphrases to stick on T-shirts and bumper stickers. Groceries are too expensive, Mr. Speaker, but one of the main driving forces behind, for example, expensive lettuce is, in drought-prone places, is climate change, Mr. Speaker. And while that member was...
Climate change, climate change, climate change. It's like Beetlejuice.
We were here continuing to address the issues that face Canadians and playing a leadership role in addressing the threats of climate change in Canada.
The Honourable Member for Banff Airdrie.
8 years the NDP Liberal government have depleted Canadian savings, raised their taxes, and increased the prices at their local grocery store. Cutting his carbon tax could bring immediate relief for Canadians, but the Prime Minister refuses. Even the Bank of Canada governor is now warning that the Liberals' carbon tax increases are causing inflation. So the policies of this Prime Minister aren't worth the cost, and Canadians know it. So will he finally side with Canadians and cancel his inflationary carbon tax increases?
The Honourable Minister for Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I've said in this House a number of times, the price on pollution was put in place in a manner where 8 out of 10 families get more money back than they pay in terms of the price on pollution. But I would have to say that the hypocrisy coming from that side of the House is unbelievable. The last Conservative government in which the Leader of the Opposition was a minister proposed cap and trade, which is a form of pricing pollution. In the last election, the Conservative Party and everybody in this chamber ran on putting a price on pollution. Now the Conservative Party campaigns actively against on pollution. How do the Canadian public...
How is a price on pollution going to fix the climate?
I want to remind the honourable members to place their questions and answers through the chair, just to keep some decorum in the chamber.
The honourable member for Pontiac. Mr. Speaker, we're talking a lot about affordability right now, but we also need to build an economy that's going to create good jobs and great quality of life for Canadians. In the Outaouais region, Mr. Speaker, we have extraordinary potential in eco and recreative tourism, and I'd like to know what the Minister of Tourism is planning to do to help us meet our full potential in the Outaouais. The Honourable Minister of Tourism. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The member for Pontiac is right. Tourism is an economic engine in our regions, and that's why the government, through Economic Development Canada, has provided $700,000 to 8 Outaouais businesses to help them improve their tourist accommodation offering. We want people to come. We want them to be able to stay more than just one day, Mr. Speaker. I would invite everyone, by the way, to explore the Outaouais because there are all kinds of ecotourism activities in place, and I'd like to thank the member for Pontiac for all the work she's doing on economic development in our regions.
Simcoe.
Mr. Speaker, new documents show the Liberals billed Canadians more than $250,000 for a 3-day cabinet meeting supposedly focused on tackling inflation. Instead of coming up with any real plans to make life more affordable, this out-of-touch Prime Minister and his cabinet spent their time eating expensive meals at high-end restaurants. Inflation is out of control, but the Liberals won't stop living large. Will the Prime Minister take the silver spoon out of his mouth, the carbon tax, and show respect to Canadian taxpayers?
There you go, buddy. Get the silver spoon.
Mr. Speaker, what this government has been focused on for the last 8 years is making sure that we are advancing measures that help Canadians. We increased the Canada Child Benefit, which instead of sending checks to millionaires, we made sure that the poorest and most vulnerable got the maximum that they could have. When it comes to childcare, Mr. Speaker, we've cut fees in half by over 50%. When it comes to child poverty, Mr. Speaker, we have lifted 450,000 children out of poverty. Mr. Speaker, what the Conservatives don't understand is that not only have we been listening to Canadians, but we have been acting on their behalf, and we continue to work hard for Canadians every single day. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Well, member for Lethbridge.
And yet somehow life is less affordable than it has ever been. Because
Yeah.
there's a punitive thing called the carbon
Ain't that
tax
the truth?
that the Liberals have applied to every single heating bill of Canadians, every single grocery bill of Canadians, every single fuel cost that Canadians incur at the pump. And Canadians are struggling to make ends meet. And this government doesn't care.
Yeah.
There is a very tangible action that can be taken on behalf of Canadians, and that is to scrap the tax. When will this government find themselves on side with the Canadian public and finally get rid of the punitive carbon tax?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, it's incredibly disappointing to hear from the members opposite when it comes to being there for Canadians, because over the past summer there have been hundreds of thousands of Canadians who have been displaced from their homes because of wildfires, because of climate change related disasters. In fact, an entire community and Yellowknife was evacuated because of unprecedented wildfires. Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives can continue to bury their heads in the sand. We are going to continue to act to fight climate change because this is existential. Our job as a government is to protect Canadians, and we will continue to do that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member for Lethbridge.
Well, I'm glad to hear the honourable member concede that despite the carbon tax, nothing is being accomplished in terms of taking care of the environment.
Absolutely nothing.
Exactly.
But Canadians are certainly worse off. They're struggling to afford the basic necessities of life. They are going to the grocery store and they are literally spending hundreds of dollars and walking out with nothing more than a couple bags of groceries. That's not okay. And after 8 years of this NDP Liberal government, they're fed up and they can't afford the cost anymore. So when will this government finally make the right decision, axe the tax, and give Canadians hope?
There you go.
Secretary to the Minister of the Environment.
2023, and if you don't have a plan to address climate change, then you don't have a plan for affordability or for the economy either. And it's clear that these Conservatives, every single idea they put forth makes it clear that they're out of touch. In fact, the only recommendations that these Conservatives have put forward would cut social programs. I'm talking about things that actually support Canadians, like Canada Child Benefit, like childcare, like dental care, like the Guaranteed Income Supplement. The Conservative plan to fix global inflation by cutting people's services and benefits, Mr. Speaker, that's no plan at all. It's irresponsible, it's risky, and it would put Canadians, families at risk.
The member for Yukon.
Mr. Speaker, small businesses are the backbone of communities across our country, making up 98% of all businesses and employing 2/3 of Canadian workers. But many Yukon business owners have reached out to me over the past few months, outlining their struggles with rising costs while still trying to recover from the pandemic. Can the Minister of Small Business outline how we are continuing to support small business in Canada, including CEBA loan holders, at this time?
Very great question.
The Honourable Minister for Small Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the MP from the Yukon for this question. I was also a small business owner during the pandemic, and I really understand the struggles that many continue to face. That is why we are offering
I really doubt she understands.
For small businesses to repay their CEBA loans that are both balanced and fiscally responsible. This includes a full 1-year extension on the repayment deadline, more flexibility on refinancing, and more time to access the loan forgiveness. We will keep listening to small businesses across the country, and that includes all Canadians, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Skeena-Bulkley Valley.
Mr. Speaker, farmers in northern BC have been hit hard by extreme drought, another symptom of the worsening climate crisis. Hay harvests are down as much as 90%, and many farmers are struggling to feed their animals. We're seeing herds sold off, and we're seeing family farms lost. Now, for months, we've been calling on this government to provide support to source hay from other parts of Canada and the United States. Local governments are waiting, provincial government is waiting, and farmers are waiting for this minister to finally come to the table. The question, how long are they going to have to wait?
Hear, hear! The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate my honourable colleague's question and fully understand the stress that the farmers are under. And as he's fully aware...
No, they don't, or else they wouldn't be doing what they're doing.
He has applied or sent the papers into my department, and we're analysing the situation, and as soon as it's done, we'll make sure the farmers are compensated. That's what the business risk management plans are for, to make sure we're able to help farmers in difficult situations. We will and will continue to do so.
Get bent, buddy.
Center. Mr. Speaker, since last fall, I've been pressing the federal government to provide emergency support to the Kitchener-Waterloo Symphony, who may have to close their doors because ticket sales haven't returned to pre-pandemic levels. I was told in question period back in February that a solution would be found. When nothing was done 2 months ago, myself and 4 other Waterloo Region MPs wrote to the PM imploring the federal government to step in with one-time support. We haven't heard back, and on Monday, the Symphony canceled its entire upcoming season. Will the federal government step in to ensure the Symphony avoids insolvency?
The Honourable Minister for Canadian Heritage.
Go hug a tree, buddy.
We've been in active touch with the organization about their ongoing financial struggles. Recovering from the pandemic remains a challenge for performing arts organizations, which is why we took extraordinary measures to support them during the pandemic. We continue to support arts organizations through a range of programs, and we'll work with the organization to see how our programs could support them. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I'm afraid that's all the time. C'est tout le temps que nous avons aujourd'hui.
That's all the time we have today for Question Period.
Holy smokes, ladies and gentlemen. What a great episode. You're going to want to stay tuned on this channel for the clips that come up, as well as go follow Mr. Sunshine Baby. And of course, smash that like button on our way out. Subscribe with those post notifications so you get notified of upcoming videos, especially live streams. Be back the same time tomorrow. You're going to want to keep your phone handy today. There's a lot of updates for this channel and on Mr. Sunshine Baby, especially because of the Million Man March for Children. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you want to get yourself some merch, link is down in the description. I will see you all same time tomorrow. Peace and love. Bye for now.